Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Khan. And thank you, Hackquarters, for the invitation. I would like to invite Lubomila and Lyric, if you could come on.
Yeah.
Get started.
I will leave you to it. Before I just leave, Lubomila, again, happy birthday. And thank you for joining us in your birthday. I hope this year will be much better than the last one. So without further ado, I'm leaving the stage. Madison, thank you for everything. Good luck and have fun, guys. Bye-bye.
Awesome. Well, in addition to it being Lubomila's birthday, we have a great conversation coming up. So I get excited by all things social innovation and impact oriented. So when Hackquarters asked me to moderate this panel, I was really excited because not only do I get to talk about one of my favorite subjects, but I also get to hear from social entrepreneurs who are doing amazing work globally, not just in where they are in Germany and the UK, but really impacting sustainability and combating misinformation. So we're going to dive into that. But first, I wanted to give a brief overview. My name is Madison. I am the director of the Social Innovation Lab at Johns Hopkins University, but was previously in the Middle East, which is where I got to know the Hackquarters team. And today we have Lubomila Jordanova, who is the co-founder and CEO at Plan A, based in Berlin. And then we also have Lyric Jain, founder and CEO at Logically, currently based in the UK. So we're going to get started without further ado. If you do have questions, please put them in the chat as we're going. I have a series of questions that I'll be asking the panelists, but then we'll open it for Q&A. And I'd like to prioritize audience questions. So I want to start off by asking Lubomila if you could tell us a little bit more about yourself. So what are you working on and why did you start Plan A?
Thank you so much. It's really a great pleasure to be here. Madison, it's great to meet you, and Lyric, you as well. Really fantastic conversation before the one we're having. So excited to share a different perspective. So Plan A, for those of you that are not familiar, is a software as a service company that enables other companies to monitor their carbon footprint and set net zero strategies as well as targets. We use a lot of science and data to do that. There's also a second hat that is relevant, I think, for the audience here. That's the Green Tech Alliance. This is a consortium of more than 1,000 companies from all over the world that are working on sustainability-related challenges.
Great. And can you dive a little bit deeper into why you started Plan A?
I had in 2016 a bit of an epiphany. I was at that point working in London in fintech and was enjoying this first or second wave of fintech happening. I was working at iWalker, prominent London-based startup, and didn't necessarily think about sustainability as a topic that I would be covering. And I was also not looking into starting my own company. But I went on a trip to Morocco, ended up cleaning beaches for a week instead of surfing, and was with a bit of a newly acquired perspective when I went back to London. And essentially within a year, I spent all of my free time on educating myself about climate change and learning actually what it means to be a human on this planet that doesn't know enough about the topic. And ultimately, after 3 consecutive experiments, I decided to quit my job and set up my own company, which is how Plan A started.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We'll dive a little bit more into Plan A in a bit. So Lyric, can you tell us a bit more about Logically? So what are you working on? And tell us a little bit more about how you were inspired to start Logically.
Absolutely. Pleasure to be on here. I guess we work in a very topical space these days. We help identify and combat misinformation and disinformation at scale and around the world. And we do it for everyone from national governments and giant social platforms to individuals. So effectively, there's 2 sides to the business. There's kind of the detection side, which we call the intelligence side, which is going through tons of data across all platforms to identify anything that could lead to untoward events occurring and lead to viral misinformation and disinformation spreading. And the other side, the countermeasures side of the business, where we help find ways in which our clients can respond to misinformation, disinformation, and hateful content online. So yeah, that's us in a nutshell. I guess the core areas for us are really the intersections of misinfo and disinfo with public safety, public health, election integrity, national security. Those are really our bread and butter areas today. And our work kind of spans multiple governments today, from the UK, US, India, to those continents, and more widely. What got me into this space was, I guess, a series of really interesting events. Unfortunately, a bit of personal tragedy in 2015 because of health misinformation. My grandmother got a bit of fraudulent messages through WhatsApp that said, "Hey, drink this special green juice, give up your cancer meds, and you'll live longer." And we probably lost her a bit earlier than we should have. And in 2016, it was the two big geopolitical events of the world. The European referendum in the UK and the American elections. And regardless of the results and the outcome of the democratic events, it was clear that kind of online behavior and activity was influencing how people made those important decisions. A great deal of misinformation on all sides, and even worse, kind of claims of adversarial actors, kind of even nation states interfering in everything from elections to national security policy to today in COVID. So I guess the adversarial side, as well as looking at the micro impact of how people decide whether or not to take their medicines, to giant decisions that countries take around who gets to lead them, kind of introduced me into the space. I was working at CCEL and the MIT Media Lab back then on the East Coast, and I guess it was perfect timing because there wasn't too much happening in the space back then. And with enough support and encouragement, founded the company. And well, it feels like a lot longer ago, but yeah, today we're kind of 120-ish person team spread across the UK, US, and India, and are fortunate enough to be supporting all the people that we do support.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lyric. And I think it's so important to hear the why behind what you're doing. And so thank you for sharing that briefly. So we are still in the middle of a pandemic, and you know, a year later, startups have had to pivot. You've had to be creative in order to figure out how to get business done, how to survive, how to grow, how to raise money. So we want to dive into some of those topics. What were the biggest challenges that you individually faced during the pandemic? You can talk about as a company or as a founder yourself, and how did you mitigate these challenges? So we'll start with Lubomila.
We had a handful of them, and they, I guess, pushed us into innovating further our, in any case, innovative business model, where essentially we had to, first of all, rethink the way we approach clients. Initially, in the beginning of COVID, we were thinking that SMEs could be an appropriate client base for us, a client group, target group. That proved to be absolutely incorrect, given, of course, the first ones to be on the receiving side of the losses and kind of the loss of investments, not only loss of revenues as of COVID, were SMEs. The second challenge, which I guess was a universal one, was the way we were used to working. We have been a startup that has always been used to the digital tools since the beginning, but we've never been a fully remote company. And that was definitely something that I personally had trouble learning as fast as I would have assumed, just because I'm quite, as on a human level, dependent on the social contacts that were immediately removed from kind of the palette of choices we had. And a final one, I guess, was just how do you communicate any issue or any problem that your solution is addressing in the context of what exactly was happening, because especially in the beginning of COVID, there was so much panic and so much concern without many people understanding how this is going to affect them in the long term, which meant for us that we had to be really sensitive towards these externalities that these companies didn't want it to face, but had to, because all of a sudden they were working online, all of a sudden they didn't have the production capabilities that maybe they had before, and they were losing opportunities for continuity of their business.
Great, thanks, Lubomila. What about you, Lyric? What were some of the challenges that you faced and how did you mitigate them? Or how are you still mitigating?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I tested positive recently, so mitigating a few circumstances personally right now. But I guess rolling back the last 12, 15 months, I think our headspace as a company and kind of startups reach this kind of maturity. It was a lot of tunnel vision, just focusing on America, the November elections last year. And even as late as March, our entire roadmaps were just focused on election. We've got to deliver for battleground states, federal agencies, everyone, and the platforms. And we had plans to build significant teams in America. And then the COVID hammer just fell on us. And kind of the most obvious way for us to be able to help our clients and get earn new clients was to refocus on how we can help identify COVID misinformation, especially where it was impacting either key decision makers or a lot of populations into and radicalizing them into conspiratorial thinking. So it completely shifted our short-term roadmap. Our systems proved to be not very resilient to COVID. Kind of back in December when the first instances of reporting came out, automatically it seemed very conspiratorial. Our models weren't trained on anything to do with COVID, so we had to figure out how we can make our models, our technology less fragile, so that when even black swan events happen, that they don't fail. So a load of technical work that needed to happen. But I guess on a more company and a team level, one of the most surprising things has been working from home and recruiting remotely without meeting people. It was around the same time that I stopped recruiting people directly, and we had hiring managers within the company that had their own responsibility for recruiting. And it was quite a strange feeling going about having people in your teams that are little icons on Zoom calls, from going from kind of having relationships with them being kind of in the same room to them to that kind of distant relationship was quite a challenge. And today we're in a weird state where half our team has never met each other. Kind of we brought in around 45, 50 people during COVID, all recruited remotely. So right now we're struggling to kind of figure out when we go back to whatever the future state looks like, partial remote working, etc. How do we reintroduce teams together? How do we kind of return to like what does standard operating procedures, etc. look like, and how do we retain some of the culture that we had pre-COVID? So those, I guess, are the kinds of challenges that we're trying to get our heads around. And I guess funding is another interesting one. I think where we'll probably jump onto it shortly, but it's it's definitely been an interesting experience fundraising through COVID as well. Again, these are things that tend to be very high trust events, recruitment, fundraising. You like to sit across the table from people and develop trust, and it's been interesting doing that over Zoom and Google Meet.
Well, with that hook, let's dive into the fundraising question. So I know that you both have fundraised during COVID successfully or secured new contracts. So I want to start with Lubomila, because I know that you recently announced a raise. How was that process of fundraising? What were some of the challenges during COVID? Were there unique challenges, that were different than before? Or did you see new types of investors interested in this space as a result of even changes in sustainability and company awareness of the need to be more compliant, and engaging in more conversations around their carbon emissions? Talk about that process for us.
Oh my God, where do I start? It has been such a challenging process. And if I can start with an anecdote that probably would give a flavor of what we experienced. We announced our funding from SoftBank, Demeter, and Coparian in March 2021. And the funding and kind of term sheets and all the legal due diligence, everything was already done in December. The only reason why we announced it in March was because one single document traveled across the planet and had to go, due to COVID, through 5 different state level authorities for it to be approved. So our company is a German registered company, which means that Germany, as a typical bureaucratic company, does not accept any online power of attorney. And basically we ended up essentially waiting for more than 2 months for this document to come. At the end, it didn't come. We had to find like another kind of, not a loophole, but an opportunity in the law system of the US and Germany in order to be able to overcome this challenge. But I guess this is really definitive as a story of how the whole process went. On one hand, we had, first of all, to overcome the challenge of not meeting people personally. And normally investors have previously bluntly said, for us, it's incredibly important to meet the founders. We even fly them in. We even take the opportunity to meet them in a casual setup with any of the partners so that they can test them for their livelihood and excitement and, you know, all these kinds of things that I guess define a more also subjective yet quite important perception of whether you work together well with someone. The second challenge was related to the transaction-based approach that you end up going through. Normally, once you know investors, you are developing relationships, you could be convincing quite on a personal level. I probably ended up having 600 or 700 phone calls within the span of kind of from autumn until the end of this process. That would just kind of would be, here's what we offer. Do you like it? No. Are you up for joining? Do you want to follow up? Like, you know, this kind of a, I would say a bit more disorganized, yet like really very structured, yet not so aligned to, I would say, this relationship building element that you're looking for in investors. It was a lot more focused on what would be the KPIs for Series A, so to say. And then the final thing that, at least for me, was quite of a novelty was the fact that we had to work as we usually do around the clock. That's totally fine. But we also had to deal with the fact that there was no boundaries and there was expectation that you're constantly working, you're constantly in front of the computer, which really made it madness at the end. I mean, we're super happy to have these investors on board because they're phenomenal and we know that they're going to support us on our growth path, but it was definitely a totally different experience from what I've seen previously with the previous rounds that we've had.
Thanks for sharing, Lubomila, and congratulations on being able to raise successfully during this, you know, the last few years. And I'm excited to hear more about how Plan A is moving forward. Lyric, talk about your fundraising process, because it was not only you know, just fundraising, it was fundraising to scale up to go to new markets like the United States. So tell us about that process and how people also are receiving, you know, because the topic of misinformation is, you know, at the forefront of our minds right now. Was that easier for you to convince investors or more difficult?
Yeah, I think we were closing our first round, our first institutional round, right about when COVID struck. So fortunately, we kind of were in that dating period, and we with the people that the institutions that we brought in. So we were able to already have a pre-existing relationship and know that these are going to be the right investors for us. So thankfully, the first transaction we closed during COVID, there weren't any hiccups. Although we did towards as the deal was closing, it became very clear that although we're raising this round for market expansion, a large usage of funds is going to be around COVID, making sure our product roadmap is fit for COVID, and right now the vaccine delivery and things like that. So there were, I guess, we did get a bit of a COVID bump in the interest, both on the client side and on the investor side. But I don't think we realized much of it on the investor side because of some of those subtle social cues and just relationship building we had with the existing DO that we'd spoken to. We remained committed to them, and I guess it paid off in a way because we just completed our third transaction with our existing investors last month. So I think, yeah, a bit of an outlier case in terms of successful transactions, but certainly have a lot of parallels with Lubomila's experience, especially around seeing how efficient the deal process can be today, where we're kind of building out our next round at the moment. And the number of calls you're able to go through and the number of stages you're able to go through is a lot more efficient today because it's all on Zoom and Google Meet. Previously, you'd have to fly to different corners of the world to meet people. Again, you lose out that relationship building with that. But from a founder's time investment point of view, you're able to be a lot more efficient, I guess. So, but yes, I'm hopeful that we can at least meet a few people physically before closing out rounds. Because I do think it does add a lot of value. But I have seen some interesting gimmicky ways in which some funds have tried to build that relationship, kind of virtual events, virtual coffees, hangout meetings, game nights, etc. But yeah, I think if people are definitely looking to raise within the next couple of months, that it's still very possible. There's still a large there's a lot of dry powder out there, and in pretty much every geography, investment in early stage and early to mid stage startups is up year on year. So still pretty good time.
Great, thanks for the insight, Lyric. So I want to just open the conversation for questions to come into the chat. So if anyone has any questions, I have a series of additional questions, but I also welcome you guys to start contributing to the conversation. So I actually want to dive a little bit more into what you're doing, Lubomila. So your work focuses on holding businesses more accountable to monitor and reduce their emissions, while ultimately improving their ESG performance. And we just spoke about ESG in the last conversation with Ez. Can you talk a little bit more about how has the pandemic made awareness of the importance of businesses being accountable for our impact on the planet more tangible, and and how has this translated into demand for Plan A?
In the beginning of COVID, we definitely had no idea what would be the response of society and how are they going to think about sustainability in the context of COVID. And ultimately, within 2 or 3 months, we were convinced that this is going to be the biggest outcome of COVID, except for the unfortunate panic and challenges that we all went through. But on the positive side, there has definitely been a lot more, not only of a discussion, but action related to sustainability, because thankfully, not only on the political, but on the corporate level, there was a recognition of COVID as a mini example of what is ahead of us if we don't take seriously climate change. We have benefited from this movement, from this change, this shift, and essentially have now started working not only across Europe, but also in the US with big corporates and across essentially different industries such as finance, construction, fashion, as well as event organizers, automotive, quite on the complex and polluting side, I would say. And the demand has certainly increased, because before COVID, we were convincing people of the existence of climate change sometimes. Other times it was mainly to explain why this should be a priority today, even though, yes, we all agree that it exists. And what COVID led to was that we ended up actually having to sit in front of a demand that was not necessarily able to be satisfied by the supply that we were able to provide. So thankfully, we took the lessons of COVID in a way that it allowed us to kind of work better as a society. As someone that works in the field, I'm never going to be satisfied with the speed with which things happen, because I just think that it's still a side topic. It's not something that is at the prime and at the same level of a defining element as, for example, COVID has been. But I guess we're waiting for the awareness to further increase. And I think UK is actually a really fantastic example of the kind of leadership we're looking to have on other political stages.
Great, thank you, Lubomila. And Lyric, diving a little bit more into what you're doing. So we're seeing growing trends and new players come in to try to combat misinformation. Talk a little bit more about what opportunities are there for startups in the future who are looking, who either can use tools like yours or can do a better job at combating misinformation themselves, or might be able to enter this space. Can you talk a little bit more about trends in the startup space with this, with misinformation?
Absolutely. I guess we had the first wave of startups in our space around the same time as we came about, so around in 2016, but we're certainly seeing another wave of startups enter the misinfo, disinfo space over the last 9 months, year or so, as yeah, a lot of the symptoms of the information disorder are becoming more and more prevalent. I'd always encourage more people to look into our space, because when we started, there was probably around 1,000 people in the world, mostly in government and in big platforms, that were paying attention to this. Now that number is probably around 10-15,000. But we clearly need a lot more people, a lot more talent focused on this problem area. There's challenges everywhere, from kind of a regulatory paradigm, or like what regulations a country is going to come up with that can't be abused by authoritarian governments, but can also avoid the whole Ministry of Truth hypothesis in our space. How do you kind of, there's been great progress over the last 3-4 years in the detection space, but it's not always clear how we respond to misinfo and disinfo. Kind of, does a takedown always work? Does a fact check always work? Things like that, I think, are still open research and innovation areas. And you could even divide it by vertical. Kind of health misinformation has thankfully got a whole amount of interest and excitement due to COVID, but there's other types of misinformation that also cause harm. Financial misinformation and disinformation, kind of outside the geopolitical context. Unfortunately, there are private sector equivalents logically on what I like to call the other side of the table, that are working on behalf of countries to spread disinformation. And these companies now see the private sector as the new and emerging wave in which they can gain their own customers. So they're working with starting to work with slightly more unscrupulous enterprises to spread disinformation about their competitors and things like that. So we certainly see the space growing. We don't think it's going to be a winner-take-all market just because of regulations, and everyone wants to avoid the Ministry of Truth hypothesis. So I'd encourage more people to try and find niches, such as some of the ones that I mentioned, because there's clearly a lot more work to be done in our space.
Absolutely. I've even seen some companies here in Baltimore working on similar issues. And, it's also about educating companies and investors and your stakeholders on the importance of that work. So definitely something to be watching in the future. Lubomila, what about you? What opportunities exist for social entrepreneurs to be part of the solution, to get engaged with holding businesses accountable for protecting the planet? So either how can any startup get involved with better impact measurement, or being more accountable to their stakeholders, be it public, private, or social sector, regarding their commitment to sustainability?
I think a value that, just listening to you, Livik, I would assume that both of us stand behind this transparency. And this is what we think, that regardless if you're sitting on the spectrum of being this social entrepreneur that is offering a solution like the one that Plan A or Logically offers, or you're someone that is an entrepreneur that is focusing on a traditional, could be any kind of traditional tech business. There's multiple ways in which you can support our society's improvement towards becoming more transparent and also more equitable, as well as more aligned to principles of sustainability. One thing that we promote as a company, not only to our clients that are within the startup sector, but anyone essentially, is to be aware of greenwashing. Greenwashing is unfortunately a phenomenon that is increasing as the topic of sustainability becomes more important. And it is essentially a loss for society if we allow for marketing campaigns and scams on the topic to be perceived as the equivalent of a thorough sustainability strategy developed by someone that not only spent time and resources, but also truthfully believes that sustainability matters for our planet. The second principle that could be of help is related to trying transparent about the fact that there's a journey on becoming this Shablon, this exemplary enterprise for good, or regardless of in which industry you are. And with this, I mean that there's nothing that happens overnight, be it related to transparency of your data, be it related to your transparency on sustainability, that can be achieved overnight. And understanding yourself as someone that takes a journey and it has to achieve certain steps in order to get to a high level of being perceived as transparent and sustainable and equitable, you become a lot more likable. You become also a lot more kind of understood in your approach, and probably people are going to be okay with the fact that you're not doing certain things in the perfect manner. Of course, we're not talking about corruption or any kind of disrespectful acts towards people or planet, but I'm sure you understand what I mean. And as a final thing that is probably quite important for the tech companies in their engagement with sustainability is to know that by taking these kinds of steps, they're going to be a lot more successful in their discussions with investors, as well as employees, as well as their customers, because this is where the whole market is moving towards. So there's an actual benefit for you to be doing that if you're not convinced simply by the need for, you know, stopping climate change or making data more transferable and more transparent.
Thank you, Lubomila. We only have about 7 minutes left, so I want to sort of round out the conversation by giving you both the opportunity to talk about where we go from here, right? So in terms of social entrepreneurship, trends that we're seeing emerging, everything from, you know, as a leader of a company being more adaptive to the environment, you know, whether it be, you know, working from home or some sort of hybrid opportunity so that your employees, especially in a distributed workforce, feel supported, but also have some flexibility. You know, what are some emerging trends that social entrepreneurs should be aware of from the perspective as founders, leaders, to better, you know, to better take care of their employees and their companies and themselves, but also, you know, as they are reporting to their customers and investors. I'm leaving the conversation open, but what are some emerging trends that you would leave, you know, leave our participants here with some thoughts on? I'll start with Lyric.
Perhaps I'll start with the one around your teams, etc. From experience, we've had quite a strange bit of feedback from different teams. Kind of typically, one thinks of engineering and technical teams as being very isolated. They typically don't want to undergo a lot of communication, and they've historically preferred working from home, etc. But that's probably the team internally that gives us the most feedback that, hey, we want to return to an office, we want to see our teammates, we want to see all the new people in the team, most often than other people. And teams that historically have relied on a lot more kind of social interaction, they're kind of more respectful and enjoy working from home more than the people who used to enjoy working from home. So I think it's been a huge learning curve from everyone, from people to leaders, around what a future state should look like. It probably looks very different depending on the nature of the work that each team does. So ensuring there's a bit of flexibility within policies across teams is going to be important. I think the flexibility, the productivity, the better kind of well-being that working from home, etc. offers can't be ignored any longer. I don't think there's going to be many startups that are going to mandate kind of 5-day a week come to the offices anymore. There's probably going to be a kind of a day or two where people might be required if there's kind of team meetings or company-wide meetings, but it's incredibly likely that workforces are going to be incredibly distributed. People are going to work from home more, to continue to work from home more often. But I guess on the innovation side, there's an interesting thing I've been thinking around. There's this concept of creative destruction that gets bandied around a lot in the venture capital community. Kind of how do you design your enterprises and your startups to effectively, again, destroy is a fairly negative word, but to disrupt existing ecosystems, ways of doing business, economies. And COVID's already done that. There's a lot of energy that startups typically need to put into disrupting, but COVID's been this giant hammer that's disrupted pretty much every existing fabric of doing business that exists. So it's a huge opportunity to innovate both internally around how you want to do things, but also in terms of your value proposition, business models that, say, a particular type of client would have never considered before, they're more likely to do that now, just because that activation energy required to break existing systems has been provided by COVID, and startups are being more accepted into untraditional sectors like government, reg tech than previously. So I do think it's a huge opportunity for introspection to do things differently internally, but also to tweak value propositions and business models, just because they're being more openly accepted by the wider community.
Fascinating. Lubomila, I'll let you close out with your thoughts around emerging trends for social entrepreneurs.
I think this is an emerging trend for many entrepreneurs, and definitely follows on what Lyric was saying. It's related to mental health. What we learned through the pandemic was that we were not knowledgeable enough of how to deal with essentially how our team was going to respond to the challenges and the changes they were constantly having to go through. Germany in particular and Berlin have not been the best at giving us really definitive answers on what is the timeline for certain changes, and that has led also a lot of people feel quite disappointed. We just got into a curfew a week ago, just for context for those that are not familiar with what's happening in Berlin. And for this purpose, we've started essentially these mental health series where we connect the team to people that would be able to give context of how you're feeling, what does it mean, and maybe a bit more specific approach to your particular challenge. That is more on the internal side. And I guess on the external side, it has been more about communities. We set up the Green Tech Alliance as a community for green tech companies, but there were so many others that were set up as response forces for COVID itself, SDG communities and others. And I think this is just the human wish to be immediately connected to one another in a moment of panic and concern and angst. And we believe that this obviously is something that is really meaningful, because at the end of the day, we find synergies amongst these projects rather than consider ourselves in the context of competition.
That's great. Thank you, Lubomila. And I agree, you know, as we're looking at moving forward, the internal and the external will involve a lot of reevaluation, but also co-creation with your, you know, not only with your staff, you know, your contractors, but also your customers. So really understanding it's almost a bit of customer discovery in a new way, where you're going and trying to understand new pain points. You know, definitely a lot of conversations to be had. And I wish you both the best as you continue to lead, inspire, and do amazing work in the different areas that you're working in. So thank you for the work that you're doing. I should also say, I don't think we get thanked enough as social entrepreneurs, because you are, you know, whether it's helping companies, you know, be more transparent and hold each other accountable, or, you know, combating misinformation and helping people to be able to decipher truth. This is all important work. So with that, thank you for engaging in this conversation. And Khan, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. No, I mean, I just wanted to come with you guys because, I mean, it's the last session. We tend to keep it as short as possible. I'm really happy to have you because I think as entrepreneurs, we are having the similar problems all around anyway. So the way that you worked out your problems, how you're helping your communities might inspire other people. This video will be on YouTube as well. I'm sure that more people will see it. And as Hackquarters, we are always here to support you. So if you want to disseminate anything you want to do, we would be happy to do it. If we can do any kind of introduction, we are happy to do it. So I'm really happy to have you guys. It was a really delightful session, and it gave me more reason to see you guys. So I hope we can see each other more. I just put a feedback form for participants if they can just fill it up. It is like 1 minute, so we can understand what can we make for the new events, because I think we will do more events in coming days. I'm really, really happy and hope to see everyone. And thanks for your time, guys.
Thank you. This was fantastic.
I mean, it's even better on our side. So I hope we will not have COVID. Maybe we will be in a nice event. But honestly, I'm not really thinking about working at home. I mean, working at office. So I would be happier if I will stay in a place that I can work. But it should be planned. So this is the biggest problem, I guess, because nobody was expecting that. So we had smaller apartments and where we don't have isolation and the right gear. But I think we are getting somewhere. At least now everybody knows that world didn't stop, even if it's a big crisis. So we can sort it out. Thank you.